Hey everybody, welcome to the Tom Rowland Podcast, brought to you by Starbright. And today we are doing another Anglers Unite episode. Today's episode is with Gabriella Hoffman. Gabriella Hoffman is a policy expert. If you don't know her, you can check her out on social media. You can listen to her podcast, which we're going to talk about on this episode. But she knows all about fishing and hunting policy. And I learned a lot in this conversation. I really did. The purpose of Anglers Unite is that we want to, one, preserve access, and we want to be able to continue to do what we love to do, fishing and hunting, and being able to go to the places that we like. If we can all unite as recreational anglers, we stand a much better chance of doing that. This series kind of explores the different ways that we can unite, challenges to doing so, as well as low-hanging fruit, ways that we can unite and preserve that access. We have so much going on here at the beginning of 2025 at the Tom Rowland Podcast. One of the things that we have determined is that we need to do a lot of work on the YouTube. This podcast started a long time ago, kind of as an experiment. I took a few of the episodes and I threw them on the Saltwater Experience YouTube channel. Over the time, the podcast just overtook Saltwater Experience channel. If you're watching the podcast on Saltwater Experience channel, we are going to see that change. We then put together a different YouTube channel called Tom Rowland Podcast. We put a lot of the episodes over there and things seem to be going well. We amassed 25,000 followers real quick, but this is the problem with YouTube, and it's not just me that's understanding this now, but many other people. We're going to actually have some guests on pretty soon to give us a much better kind of deeper dive into this. But if you are a YouTuber or you have a YouTube channel, be careful with shorts, because shorts can be a great thing or they can really damage your channel. Despite what many YouTube experts say and many YouTube coaches and many YouTube people say, there are many of us who have had good success with shorts, and it has damaged or destroyed the overall channel. So that being said, I'm one of those people that the YouTube shorts, despite getting, some really great views on the shorts, a couple million on not videos here and there, that seems fantastic. But it has really taken a toll on some of the other content, the content like this, the long form video. So we're now moving all of the long form interview podcasts, like the one that you're about to listen to its own dedicated channel, Tom Rowland Full Length Podcast. The link will be in the description. That's where this one is being listed or posted. And if you could, and if you want to, you can follow that particular channel. Then you'll know when all the new ones come out. Hit the little button where you can get the notification and follow that channel, and then you won't miss them. If you don't like that idea, you can subscribe to the newsletter. And the newsletter, we send out all the new content every week. You can do that at tomrowlandpodcast.com. And if that's not enough, you can also text 305-930-7346. And that is another place where we will notify you of new podcasts that are coming out. So the YouTube channel is moving to Tom Rowland Podcast Full Length. That link will be in the description. The one that we have right now is going to turn into nothing but shorts and clips, because that's what is doing well there. If you know anything about YouTube and you have had a similar issue with YouTube Shorts, I'd be interested in hearing about it. You can email podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That would be very interesting. And I know we have a couple of guests coming on in the next few weeks that are also going to talk about the YouTube Shorts, and how you can avoid the same problem that we both had. So anyway, we're going to get started with this episode with Gabriella Hoffman, and I really appreciate her coming on. I look forward to checking in with her many more times in the future and doing that regularly. This is Anglers Unite, brought to you by Bernowin, and we're going to get started with Gabriella Hoffman right now. Here we go.
This is Gabriella Hoffman, and you're listening to the Tom Rowland Podcast.
You do a lot of podcasts?
Of course, yeah. I host 2 of my own and do a lot of appearances.
What are your podcasts called?
District of Conservation is my long-standing one. It's on policy, but we also do some storytelling there. And then I host a women-centric outdoor one called the Sportswoman Show, which is more recent.
Very cool. So when it comes to like policy and all of that, how did you get started in that?
That's a great question you're posing. I have always been kind of political since I was younger, always got the political bug. I work primarily in politics for my primary job. Today I lead a policy center catered to conservation and energy issues. So of course it's kind of in the blood for me, but I've always had an interest in public policy, stemming from my upbringing and then just wanting to care about, how do you safeguard the outdoors from a effective, I would say, means, and you have to get involved in public policy. So that's kind of how I got roped into it.
Yeah. And then what's the tie? Did you, were you raised in an outdoor family?
Mm-hmm.
What's the tie back to the outdoors?
Yeah, I grew up fishing. My father's an avid fisherman. I grew up in Southern California, and my family actually came from Eastern Europe, what is now modern day independent Lithuania. It used to be illegally part of the Soviet Union. And there's a big fishing culture, nature culture in Lithuania. And fishing was something he grew up with and passed down to me. And since there were no boys in our family, it was just me and my younger sister. I was the chosen daughter, being the older daughter, I guess, to go fishing alongside him. So it's something I've been doing since I was 8 years old, and officially, I would say, really hooked by the time I was 12. I caught a very consequential catfish on Memorial Day weekend in 2003, I remember, and it was probably the biggest thing I'd caught at the time. And once you catch something consequential like that, you just can't avoid going fishing. And then it kind of springboarded into other outdoor activities. But I've been fishing since I was little and stuck with it.
And when you started fishing when you were little, that was in California?
Mm-hmm.
And so what kind of fishing would you do?
We did a combination of freshwater fishing on some of these various different tributaries. Santa Ana River Lakes is one. I grew up in Orange County. So you either had the Pacific Ocean, which was kind of our playground. We used to do deep sea fishing all the time. We had this special called 2 for Tuesdays out of Dana Point, California. And when I was not in school, my dad would always wrangle me to go on those different trips. We would always go down as far south as like the San Onofre nuclear power plant. You could see that a few miles offshore. And then we'd sometimes go a little north, maybe towards Newport Beach, and you could see a little bit of Catalina Island. So that was kind of my original playground, but we did a combination of saltwater and freshwater fishing growing up.
When you go out on one of those, that's like a head boat that you're going out on?
Yes.
So what kind of fish would you catch when you go out on a half day trip like that or a day trip? What are the fish that they target?
I believe it was calico bass, and different species in the West Coast do not translate to the same species on the East Coast. So something that could be a bass in California may not necessarily translate to what, like a striper bass or a striped bass is on the East Coast.
Right, or like
so there was like a
tail,
yeah,
California yellowtail. That's what you get in the sushi restaurants, so hamachi. And then our yellowtail in Florida is yellowtail snapper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember calico bass. I think triple tail. Or whatever the California equivalent is, I can't recall off the top of my head. But something I remember catching, even from like the cliffs of California, it was forbidden to possess. Of course, we caught and released it, but Garibaldi was a really neat fish that I remember catching early in my fishing career.
I don't know what that one is.
Mm-hmm. It's a cute little orange fish, protected at the time. I'm not sure if it's still protected, but you can't possess them, of course. So we just released it after catching it, admiring it for a second. And of course, for freshwater fishing, I was primarily targeting catfish, trout, and the typical species you would find anywhere inland.
Yeah. Some great bass fishing out there, too. I feel like California is not really a state that I've spent enough time fishing. I know there's some amazing fishing out there, and south. I also haven't been to Cabo San Lucas, and I have a guy on the podcast this afternoon from Cabo San Lucas, so I'm looking forward to learning about that. But I know there's some amazing fishing out there. So how long did you stay in California? You're not still in California now, are you?
No, I spent 21 years in California. I was born there, first in my family, born in the US, and then I made the decision to move out to the Washington, D.C. area, specifically Virginia, where I call home now for about 13 years. But I spent 2/3 of my life in California. And you're right, even if you're a native and you go fishing, you can't see every single spot you want to. I regret not going more deep sea fishing, going towards, south of the border. There's excellent marlin fishing or tuna fishing. I think you can even find some of the billfish out that way too, and I never got to do that, which is one of my biggest regrets. I wanted to do alpine trout fishing in the mountains, never really got to do that either. I just did, some of the stalker ponds, unfortunately, because that's what was available in Southern California, since there's no highly oxygenated waters in Southern California, specifically in Orange County. But those are two of my biggest regrets. So even California natives, we lament not being able to see everything too.
What about any of those long-range headboat trips where I think it's called the Royal Polaris, or there's some, I think that's what the boat's called, but it goes way out. It goes out of San Diego, and they go way out, and they catch everything. I mean, they catch really big fish, and it's a headboat, and a whole bunch of people will go on it. But I mean, dogtooth tuna and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's a different trip. I was thinking about my friend Robert Trossett, and he did this article a long time ago. It was the first time I had ever seen something like that, a long-range headboat trip, and they brought back all of these incredible fish. But that one was probably in Australia. That what they're doing on that Royal Polaris is, I don't know, they do some really incredible fishing there, and I'd like to do that too.
That's the first time I've heard of that. San Diego, I went to college there, but I never got to do fishing out of the bay, which is really unfortunate. And oddly enough, for a fisherman, someone who has gone fishing, I get now prone to seasickness. So I don't know if I can do those trips unless I'm sufficiently medicated or protected in that respect. I didn't want to become sick. I took a trip in Mexico. I think it was Mazatlan in 2007. And for some reason, just the forces overwhelmed me. And that's when I started getting sick. But now I take precautions, but I need to see before doing a trip like it, but want to do it.
Life. That's weird. But I guess it could happen to anybody. So anyway, so now I follow your work on online, on Instagram and other things, and I've seen you on other podcasts. So I wanted to get you on here to talk about a lot of these different issues. And we talked about 5 things before the podcast that you seem to think are kind of the most pressing, the most important, and the ones that us as anglers need to know the most about. Can you tell us what those 5 things are in your opinion?
Absolutely. And I kind of want to take it a little back step a little bit, kind of what the attitudes are for recreational fishing. And you probably have a huge smattering of different listeners of all political stripes. And I'm not going to make this political in any sense, partisan wise. But what we typically see in terms of recreational fishing, in terms of the bolstering of such an industry, or kind of fewer attacks witnessed to it. We do typically see this under, let's say, Republican administrations, where it's seen as more business friendly, therefore, as a response, more friendlier to recreational fishing interests, especially from an economic and regulatory standpoint. We have seen, unfortunately, in recent years under Democratic administrations where they might give outsized influence to anti-fishing efforts, or maybe one sector of the fishing industry over, let's say, recreational, and try to pit commercial fishing versus recreational fishing against one another. That's typically what I've seen. So what I kind of anticipate
examples of that happening in the last 4 years,
sometimes that does happen where this pitting of interests does occur. I think going back to this was in the first Trump administration, but the debate over whether or not to pass the Modern Fish Act to improve the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So you're not regulating commercial fishing and recreational fishing in the same way, because they're two very different styles of fishing, different demands, different kinds of standards apply to them, and they shouldn't be viewed in the same prism. So sometimes you see a clashing of that. And then the Modern Fish Act was passed to clarify and, I would say, orient and regulate recreational fishing a little bit differently, even still under the auspices of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So now you have two different fishing styles, distinct, unique, even in the eyes of Congress and government, kind of viewed like that. So you don't really see much of a back and forth so much with that, but still there's going to be some clashes, especially in those different fishery councils sometimes. And you do see, if I remember from this past administration, I think the first issue or the first priority or first thing you're going to see is kind of maybe bringing some balance back to these fisheries councils. So it's not just certain commercial fishermen who might be in agreement with, clamping down recreational fishing, sitting on these different pivotal board seats. You're now going to be seeing more recreational fishing interests presented and represented. You're going to see fewer arbitrary closures of, let's say, red snapper in parts of the Gulf of Mexico region, and even in the Atlantic. We've had some issues in South Carolina, from what I remember, where snapper season was extremely shortened as well. And so that's something that I think your viewers are typically aware of, that buoying back and forth between, how do you balance the interests? How do you give more oversight or more representation to recreational anglers, especially through those fishery councils? We're going to see, I think, more representation of people who recreationally fish come back to that as well, going back to this kind of bigger picture of recreational interests, I would say, being more represented in Congress. Of course, all interests are going to be represented, but I think recreational fishing interests will have a bigger seat at the table, both onshore and offshore, because we did see a lot of, I would say, outsized influence placed to other ocean, let's say, dependent industries over recreational fishing. And there was potentially a loss of, let's say, access where these certain vessel speeds were going to be implemented as well. And I think we're going to be seeing a revoking of that Atlantic vessel speed rule for sure. And that's why those councils are extremely important, to have people there who could articulate, the perspective of recreational anglers, debate, deliberate, and then make sure those views are represented, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And if that industry is not represented, especially in the governmental space, you lose your voice, you lose access, you lose ability to, supplant and replenish your livelihood, and to give people, important memories. It's not just, the trying to get your creel limit and, of course, making a buck, but it's also giving people the opportunity to remember their day out on the water, whether it's to go boating or even to catch, a billfish or something of that nature. So it's fun, and people want to quantify that fun and keep those traditions alive, in addition to supporting the economy and all those hundreds of thousands of jobs that come with it. So I think seeing the fisheries councils stacked with people who are more representative of the greater fishing industry at large, largely recreational anglers, is something we're going to see. I was talking about ocean industrialization, and I'm not sure how much you've weighed into, let's say, certain energy exploration as it relates to offshore wind. There's been a debate with mostly commercial anglers have largely come out against, let's say, offshore wind or ocean industrialization efforts. But you do start to see a cohort of recreational anglers having seen certain areas become no-go zones or off limits, where a lot of these different turbines are being constructed. Not necessarily having input on these projects. They see their, let's say, sacred grounds or areas where they have pinpoints on their monitors for their different tracking devices. They see that the fish are not going there. I've talked to many, many different anglers across the Atlantic, especially as you go more north, and they say that fish that are normally easy to target in these particular popular places that they have recorded are not going to these spaces anytime these, let's say, offshore structures are being constructed, even with it being in the last 10 years. So even recreational anglers are kind of coming to be very skeptical of ocean industrialization efforts. And I'm happy to answer any questions and elaborate more about that.
I definitely want to talk about that, because, personally, if I had a hill to die on, it would be on access. Put whatever limits you want on the fishing, but we still need to be able to go there. So anytime that I hear about a no-go zone, whether that is because of construction or anything else, that makes me very, very nervous. But let's go back to this. Let's go back to this management council. You're talking about, with a new change in the White House, we're likely to see more recreational representation. How will that happen? What's the process of someone rolling off of one of those boards and a new person coming on? Is that an appointment? Is that how does that happen?
It is an appointment process. So there are seats that become available. People are appointed to I believe it's a 4-year term. I'm on my one of my conservation councils here in Virginia where I live, not particularly relating to recreational fishing, but more so land issues. And typically you're appointed to a 4-year position, the same with federal government advisory councils as well. So as those vacancies start...
Well, will that 4-year term, will that mirror like the president's 4-year term, or will it overlap?
There may be some overlap. Some positions may start in the new year. Sometimes people are appointed midway through because they've been held back, or maybe they weren't able to get certain candidates. And you don't have to go through a congressional approval for these board advisory positions. They're done largely through the agency, so Department of Interior, NOAA Fisheries, Commerce Department, things of that sort. So they go through a different process than, let's say, a cabinet appointment or an ambassador appointment. So you don't have to go through all these hoops to be appointed. You're just recommended to the appropriate person who oversees the board. And largely that would be definitely under NOAA for these different fishery councils. If you're looking more so for like the recreational fishing board, that's part of a council and the Department of Interior. There's also a separate process for that. So you ultimately will get approved by the eventual cabinet picks recommended, and maybe the deputies and those who oversee these board appointments will give the green light, and then you're appointed. But if you want a position, you can volunteer actually and put your name into consideration. And if you have a connection, that also is very helpful. But they want to, from my understanding, what I hear from the chatter coming out of the Trump administration is they want people to apply. And if they have alignment with the administration, and can, put their credentials, past experience, you're more than likely to stand as a candidate for going onto those advisory boards. So they do want to have kind of like a grassroots process, more so than just like stacking it with kind of people who've been there before, fixtures.
So you're on one of these. You're saying that you're doing something right now that's kind of similar. What's the time? Like if someone was interested in doing that and thought they had something to offer and they wanted to be the voice or be one of the voices of recreational fishing on one of these councils, what kind of time requirement is that? Like when you sign up for that, like is it a couple of meetings a year? Or what is it? What do you have to do to be a good council member?
Yeah, so in my personal position, I'm only expected to attend a few meetings a year, so maybe 2 at most. These federal boards may require, I think, meeting on a quarterly basis at most. They're not really time consuming. What's more time consuming is actually working for the administration, but these are volunteer based positions. You're not compensated for volunteering your time. So you're expected to dedicate a couple hours a year to these positions, sometimes in your locality. Sometimes they ask you to come to Washington, D.C., or if you're on these like more regional based commissions, it would be in your region, from my understanding, as to where these meetings and different types of discussions will be taking place. But if it's a more federal oriented one, you would come to Washington, D.C., or some particular meeting location that they choose, a couple hours, maybe a quarter dedicated to these different meetings. You'll probably be, I would say, informed of different discussions about approvals of different policies and maybe advise and consent in that respect. And that's what I would think these more federal based advisory board positions do. You're more advise and consent. You don't have the final say over policy. The people who make the regulations in the different agencies will ultimately do that. But you can consult on, let's say, different proposed rules or, guiding frameworks about how to bolster recreational fishing. If you want to see a change to something or an amending or a bolstering of, let's say, Dingell-Johnson, and how those excise taxes work, or hypothetically speaking, how do you want to like propose like greater seasons of particular target fishing, things of that sort. So depending upon what advisory committee you get selected to, the commitments vary according to position, discretion, and all that. But from what friends of mine have told me who have worked on these different committees, especially on the hunting and shooting sports side, they like it and they say it's not very taxing on their time, but a good supplement to their careers.
But they have some sort of a voice for to represent their interest in the
Yes.
in the fishing world or the hunting world, which I guess we need a lot of different people because, like, I don't know, I find it interesting that even as hunters and fishermen on the recreational side, there's still a lot of infighting between just the different groups. You've got different styles of fishing. You've got the different, inshore versus offshore versus fly fishing versus everybody's got their own set of kind of things that they want to protect. So, like, how many council members are there? How do we get the most diverse recreational fishing council out there, so that there's never going to be a situation where everybody's happy. I understand that, but there could be a situation where everybody is represented, right, and everybody has a voice. Is that possible? Are there that many seats?
There could be. And what I'm seeing a little outside of our realm in the outdoor industry, but I'm seeing the president-elect choosing his own, let's say, ambassadors. So I wonder if he's going to implement that same strategy of starting with a clean slate. If people's terms are expired, I'm not sure exactly, how many are up for renewal, or if some of the people who are holdovers from this administration or maybe the Obama administration that have served continuously, if they leave voluntarily, or if you're serving at the pleasure of the president, you change. So we're going to see some interesting dynamics where he may want to see more pro-recreational anglers be appointed. But if someone wants to stay, you can't necessarily force them out unless they're engaging in nefarious behaviors. It's really hard to remove someone unless they're in total disagreement with the mission statement and thwarting the goals, or perhaps they're engaged in some sort of conflict of interest. But depending upon who potentially could be selected, there is a fishing and boating council under the Department of Interior, and then of course those different advisory councils under NOAA and Commerce. And so we have to see, and I can get back to you in terms of like how many available spots there are going to be, and push out information to your followers and listeners in terms of like opportunities for them to apply and put their name into consideration. But there should be at least a couple available positions. And I would say most of the time they do pick people who are in alignment with recreational fishing. Sometimes they don't, but I would say they try to keep those advisory boards pretty bipartisan, pretty representative of all interests, but we may see it steered towards trying to be more pro-recreational fishing and friendly to recreational fishing interests.
You're also going to see commercial fishing interests involved, right? Which is very important. I mean, we have commercial fishermen that are. There's a lot of different, levels of recreational fishing. There's a lot of different levels of commercial fishing. You've got somebody that's a commercial yellowtailer in the Florida Keys. That's a way different thing than a longliner or a purse seiner with. I mean, you can be a commercial spear fisherman, right? Like we have people that do that have been former guests, and certainly people that are listening, going out and spearing hogfish and selling them to the restaurants. That's a commercial fisherman. There's a lot of different levels to commercial fishing, and they need to be represented as well. Let's talk about this the no-go zones as it comes to. You called it ocean industrialization. So that would be oil rigs, wind. Is there any other thing going on out there? Are they trying to? I know that there have been some inventions of using the tide and the current to generate power through the tide and the current, but I don't know if any of those are being implemented or if those are all just experiments now. But do you know of any other industrialization specifically for energy, to create energy, like wind? Like that's a big one, the wind thing.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm not against offshore oil and gas. I actually do largely support it when it's done correctly. But I think that same accountability to offshore oil and gas is not extended to offshore wind. And I think a lot of recreational anglers have been extremely sidelined. And a lot of these wind companies do come to these people and say, we're going to buy your support. Don't criticize us. We'll give you access, supposedly. Just agree with us. Let's hush, do this. And if you want to give, let's say, deference to all interests, and there's always going to be an impact with any energy project, onshore, offshore, of course. And that same level of criticism and deference should be awarded to everyone equally. But what I've observed, unfortunately, is seeing just this carte blanche approval and ignoring of potential implications from offshore wind. And there's a lot of questions. What is its impact on marine life? What is its impact on fisheries? There's a lot of studies being done on a whole different host of different fish species, and they have shown that their breeding habits are affected adversely by offshore wind development. You have seen, and well documented, even from NOAA fisheries scientists, that endangered whales can be imperiled by the different sonar activities and just even by construction of these different various projects. And what I have seen too, where sometimes you see, I would say even more so, less fissures among commercial and recreational anglers starting to come together to realize that these potential areas where there developing and perhaps surveying for offshore wind, they become no-go zones, as you alluded to. So in these areas where they're conducting these surveys, which is sometimes even prime fishing grounds for both commercial and recreational anglers, they're seeing a loss of access. So you can't go, let's say you've pinpointed a spot on your navigation system, that's now potentially under this area where they're developing an offshore wind turbine. And then you also see the vessel speed rule proceed. Is it in the same area where offshore wind development is also occurring? I've been told, and I haven't been able to establish a concrete relationship, but I have seen too many coincidences. Let's say in New Jersey, when I did a report on this, I do a lot of video storytelling too. And in my investigative work there, I did see a correlation between the vessel speed rule slow go zones in New Jersey and areas where they were developing offshore wind. So was BOEM, the Department of Interior agency that relates to offshore energy exploration, giving license to offshore wind companies and creating these no-go zones for them, and then excluding people, let's say the recreational anglers and boaters, from discussions. I have had private conversations with a lot of people in the recreational fishing industry, and they've told me off the record that they do feel very slighted, and that offshore wind was getting a bigger priority and more of a seat at the table of discussions with this vessel speed rule in the Atlantic. And so a lot of people are kind of realizing that unless you really make an aggressive case, if something more powerful and attractive, so to speak, and something that is heavily subsidized by the federal government can take precedence over your industry, you're easily at the chopping block. So the federal government under this outgoing administration saw that wind, in their eyes, is more profitable than the marine industry. And a lot of recreational anglers and boaters said, of all political stripes, said that this is an unacceptable rule. They may see now that it is because certain industries like wind were getting preference over boating and fishing. Not everyone agrees with that premise, but in my estimation, I do see that the marine industry was sidelined heavily to make way for the offshore wind industry. And now you start to see the impacts of that matriculating, and we don't know how much damage, let's say, the preference in alongside with, this vessel speed rule that still hasn't been implemented to my knowledge, or could be revoked within the next few weeks with this new administration taking effect very soon. We don't know what the damage of this toying around for years upon years of creating this logo zone would do, and what industries benefited from that. So I think we may see that connection established a bit more between offshore wind. But like I said, every energy sector, traditional wind, whatever, does have an impact, but are we really accounting for some more than others? And that's a question all of us recreational anglers have to have. And I think there will be more scrutiny with offshore wind as a result.
So when you have, like say off the coast of Louisiana, or really anywhere, there's offshore drilling all over the place. When they were pioneering those areas and surveying those areas for gas and oil drilling, do you think that they were having the same type of preferential treatment that you're seeing from wind? Or is it different today? I mean, it was a different time. I mean, we go back a long time ago for the Deepwater Horizon to be drilled or something like that. But I just wonder if we have anything to draw from of that. This was once preferential to the gas and oil industry, and now we're seeing the same thing happen on wind, or it's totally different, and wind is being given this carte blanche that gas and oil never had.
I think at the beginning, when maybe the environmental movement was not as legally armed and powerful as they were, perhaps there was less scrutiny awarded to oil and gas. And I think because of the different accidents that have occurred, oil and gas is very, very careful, especially with the fact that offshore oil and gas in particular, most of the royalties that they pay to the federal government goes to this fund called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So they wanted to be very cognizant, I think, of any potential impact they had. And through different laws and mechanisms, they've been able to say, okay, we're going to offset whatever damage potentially we do, or any of the monies we generate from the government bestowing us this privilege of drilling in, public waters. We want to be careful. We want to be good stewards. And this is our promise through oil and gas royalties to the tune of $900 million a year to help, put back, monies to support onshore activities across the states and the federal side of things. So maybe in the beginning they weren't given scrutiny, but what I have seen, with this introduction of offshore wind, it just seems to me that They don't get the same scrutiny because, like with anything that's shiny and bright, it sounds really great. There's no real accountability towards it. It just sounds very promising. And with government becoming so big and unaccountable, it's really hard to focus your efforts on a behemoth like that. And it sounds really enticing, especially when they give different, let's say, sometimes they do give, boating companies and recreational fishing charters, they do give them some sort of money to like buy their favor. And that happens sometimes with oil and gas too. But I think more so with wind, that's what we're seeing. So I think it can happen with any different interest. There's excitement over things, although offshore oil and gas has proven to be a bit more effective than offshore wind because offshore wind doesn't promise reliable energy that much. They say, well, we have to pivot to this because it's better for the environment, but there's not even concrete evidence of that too because
I know. I mean, there's not. I've been waiting for it, but I don't know. I'm sure you know a lot more about it than I do, but I don't know that even the wind farms that are on land are being proven to be that effective. And then there's a tremendous amount of waste with the blades and all of that there's not even any disposal of the things. They just bury them. Like that doesn't seem like a good trade-off to me. I don't know though.
Yeah, I don't know if your listeners or viewers saw what happened in Nantucket last summer. One of the turbines off of their newly constructed turbine, or their project rather, broke off, washed ashore, and really destabilized that vacation community. So fishing charters weren't able to go out. I believe boating, surfing, different, marine dependent industries were at a standstill because of this breaking of a turbine.
If a turbine breaks, why would they shut down everything?
To clean up because of it's hazardous. A lot of the materials.
The water and things like that. Like or oil or what is it that's in the water? Do you know?
Well, the blades contain different toxins.
Okay.
So rare earth elements
break, then the water's polluted is basically what you're saying. People can't swim in the water or they're afraid of getting like
shards
of that. Okay. So that seems like that would be a tremendously very difficult thing to clean up. We can't get the microplastic out of the ocean. How are we going to get shards of fiberglass out of the ocean?
Right.
Seems really tough.
Right. So it put that community at a standstill for a couple weeks. And a lot of people who are very dependent on tourism couldn't work. They were told you have to shutter your business for a few days until we figure this out. There was a lot of back and forth in the community at council meetings. A lot of people, rightfully so, were questioning the wind company. Why didn't you do much to ensure that our beach communities will be protected? Why am I losing my livelihood over your mistakes? So there was a lot of back and forth over that too. And I'm not sure what's going to be wrought from that, but if a beach community in New England could be, kind of put into chaos over a single turbine collapsing, I could imagine what hundreds of these across the coastlines could do if they were to falter and not work as they tell us it'll work.
Well, if one breaks, more are going to break, right? Like that seems. If there was a sure thing, it is going to be that if one breaks, then you can expect that to happen from others. So we talked about the industrialization. Some of the things that you have on your list here: expanding recreational fishing access on public waters, inshore and offshore. I'd like to talk about that. Ensuring adequate recreational fishing representation on the fishery management councils. We've touched on that already. Fighting ocean industrialization. That's what we were just talking about. Supporting rights to hunt and fish amendments in the states, which we just had a big victory in Florida, which we can discuss too, and then fighting efforts to ban lead tackle. So let's talk about that one, because I know that there was a something that was proposed that threatened bottom fishing from basically Maine to Key West. Are you aware of that? And I'm pretty sure that it had to do with lead tackle. It wasn't that you couldn't fish, but you just couldn't drop weights. And so that basically precludes your ability to bottom fish if you can't use lead tackle. But what do you know about lead tackle? And I mean, that's on your list. It's number 5 on your list. But let's talk about that real quick, because that has a lot of as we talk about that, bottom fishing and bottom fishing rights and the ability to use lead or not use lead. Of course, you could use other things like tungsten maybe or some other weights. But that has a big. It's almost like the the vessel speed limit. Like you're not saying that you can't go there, but you can't go there. You can't idle 40 miles out into the ocean. You'll sink your boat. Like that's you have to run, to operate safely. You have to go a certain speed. So if you have to idle or go very, very slowly, you're just saying that people can't go there. And I definitely want to talk about the vessel speed, what you know about that too. But let's talk about lead first. What do you know about banning lead? And of course, that seems to come from California being the first state to do that. And you see it on your fishing tackle when you get it, or if you're ordering it somewhere, it says it's, this contains lead and it's not being sold in California. That's the first thing that you see. So California, I think, to my knowledge, was the first state to do something like that.
Yep.
But where are we with that now?
It's an interesting debate in terms of banning or permitting lead tackle, and it's a perennial issue. It affects even the hunting industry as well. And as someone who believes in maximizing access to people, making it economical and affordable for people to start to learn how to fish and hunt, I think a low-hanging fruit gesture, or on the surface, it sounds like a low-hanging fruit gesture to ban lead tackle and bullets sounds very innocent, sounds really great for the environment, but the science is very lopsided when it comes to it. What they've done in terms of, blood level content on the hunting side, it has shown that if you remove everything properly, there's really an infinitesimal difference in terms of using lead shot versus not using lead shot in deer.
Wait just a second. You said if you remove everything, what do you mean by that?
I also think the people who make
from the animal.
Yeah. So where this comes about is environmentalists who think that hunters and anglers. Let me backpedal a little. Why we see this done perennially? It's environmentalists who probably don't go hunting or fishing very often, or fishing in particular, and they assume that people who go to public waters are deliberately leaving lead tackle everywhere they go. They lob the same accusations as at hunters, saying that they're leaving purposely shell lead shot, in national wildlife refuges. They're leaving it in the oceans and just want to make everything worse for the environment. But that's really having a low opinion of America's hunters and anglers, the true conservationists, as we often talk about in our industry. And having this low opinion of people really feeds into misinformation and their success in vilifying lead tackle and lead bullets. And so you have people who are very removed from these activities, who are trying to dictate policy and usage of these different supplemental materials, which is buttressed by a lot of jobs. A lot of people are very dependent on jobs involving lead tackle, lead bullets. There's an ammunition industry, there's a tackle industry. They don't factor into account that it's not just people making it to cause, it's not people in the industry to cause ill intent or ill harm to nature or to people. It's a very, very highly regulated industry. The EPA, they say that you can't regulate lead, ammunition, or bullets as a toxic substance. There's been debate over that. Of course, people are still very concerned about, ingesting lead. And I don't think anglers and hunters are wanting to ingest lead in their animal that they take, especially something like a deer. I go hunting too, in addition to fishing, and I always make sure the lead shot is removed fully. And I think most hunters and anglers do. So we're not deliberately trying to poison ourselves by using this. And everyone has a preference, even on the fishing side. If tungsten is better for you, you want to pay a few more dollars for tackle involving tungsten or some non-lead alternative. That's great. But a lot of people just starting out in the industry on both the hunting and fishing side, they default to lead because it's affordable. It gets the job done. It takes the necessary shot when you're hunting. It's effective when you're going fishing too. And so to replace that gradually could gradually lead to this pricing out of people who might be barely making ends meet, or they can't afford to go on luxury trips. And what they can only do is just go off of the basic, lead tackle that is available at Walmart or some sort of economical store like that. And as you gradually price people out of these activities, it complicates access. So they not only try to ban it, economically or from sales. They also say we have to forbid it on public lands or public waters, as the Fish and Wildlife Service had done these past 4 years. Although they now have this pilot program to introduce voluntary phase outs, which is more preferable. It's not my preferred policy until I see concrete evidence that lead is really this pervasive threat that they tell us it is. Of course, you always wash your hands after using lead. Like, that's a no-brainer. I think most people are educated on that.
Most sword fishermen that I know have grabbed the lead and handle it all day long. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that people are washing their hands like after they touch lead.
They could. We can encourage that without, the force of government. I think that's always room for improvement. But it's like a little death by a thousand cuts. And what we say in the hunting industry too, like fishing, is if they go after one type of tool or one type of accessory or one species, what's to say that another species that is very popular is not going to be targeted, or some method of fishing? They could say offshore fishing is harmful to billfish. Let's stop doing it. Or bass fishing, the bass have feelings. And if we, target them with treble hook, or whatever, type of tackle, it's cruel and inhumane to use treble hooks, or, I like circle hooks. I prefer to use those whenever I fish in Florida too. But they could say that one type of fishing or one type of hook is dangerous, and we have to gradually phase those out because of the perceived harms that they may have. But that again, impacts people's ability to purchase, which then makes them less interested to go outdoors. So then that access question comes into play. People are not going to want to go fishing if it's too expensive, if they're priced out of these activities. So that's what is the big worrisome thing here. And it's still going to be an issue, not so much from the legislative standpoint, because we have a more, like I said, favorable administration, which is not going to take these efforts. You'll see challenges in the courts to that, I think, more so. And you may see lawsuits filed by certain environmental groups that may not like recreational fishing take hold again. But as a framework and as a policy, you're not going to see that. But you do have to worry about states prohibiting it, like California, who may try to expand their influence in different states where they're mulling these lead bans in some capacity. But federally, you're not really going to see much of an effort to do that for the next couple of years.
I mean, not to mention that people have thousands and thousands and thousands of lures, not to mention thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fishing tackle that contains lead. So to do a mandate right now that you can't use any of that anymore, it's just, where's all that going to go? It's going to go in the landfill. How is that better than the alternative of sitting in your fishing room or whatever, waiting for your next trip? That stuff costs so much money. Nobody voluntarily just throws it into the ocean. But that's a different argument that you're never going to convince anybody that doesn't fish that's the case. But it is very expensive stuff, and you don't want to lose it. And then to have all of a sudden you just can't use that anymore. That's like saying, okay, we're going to have electric cars only, and you just can't ever drive your other car anymore. So where are all these cars going to go? What are you going to do with them? I don't know. That's kind of the equivalent on a smaller scale. So the lead tackle could have other repercussions too if that were a ban. Then basically you're not allowed to bottom fish in certain areas. What about the vessel speed proposal? Can you tell? I mean, some people may not know about it. We have freshwater fishermen, saltwater fishermen, inshore, offshore, people from all over the country and the world listening. So can you just kind of explain when we say the vessel speed proposal, what that actually is and where that's being proposed and what it is being proposed for?
Yeah, I'll do it in a simple manner as possible, because the drafters of the rule want to make it as complicated and convoluted as possible, so we don't understand what they're trying to do in terms of restricting access. But for the past 4 years, and they put a final rule, to my knowledge, right after the election, and I think it hasn't been formally published, or it could soon be published, but I think it's one of the few things that's going to be revoked once we get incoming President Trump back into office. But they had received a lot of blowback from this rule because it would have instituted, if it was formally adopted, a vessel speed rule for 6 months of the year, from coastal Maine down to about coastal Georgia, a little bit north of Florida, where your vessel between 30 to 60 feet or 35 to 65 feet could only travel 11.5 miles an hour. And anyone who's taken an offshore trip on a boat, whether to go fishing or boating or what have you, whale watching, it could be something as simple as that. Your boat typically goes a lot faster than that. And the concerns with this for half of the year is it's going to lengthen the time with which you travel. It's going to make recreational offshore trips extremely impossible. It's going to add to the cost of fuel. It's going to mean you have fewer trips, less business, less income coming in, and ultimately, people see it as a job-crushing policy too, because are you going to have to let go of staff because of the different demands, placed on you now that you have to travel at a much slower speed. And the justification in the eyes of regulators in the current NOAA and Commerce Department is that boaters and anglers, the people of these kind of medium-sized watercraft, are imperiling endangered North Atlantic right whales. And these these whales, are pretty large. And if you have studied or seen what they look like, these whales, if they clash with your 35 to 65 vessel, they can paralyze your boat and cause you to sink. And what we see done here with this rule saying these recreational outfits have to travel at a slower speed if they're between the size, is that they're conflating recreational watercraft with commercial watercraft, these bigger kind of transport cargo boats, which sometimes do clash with these whales unintentionally. But they're targeting recreational boats because they just don't, again, see the distinction between commercial versus recreational. So they're placing the same standards on both of these type of interests, even when a North Atlantic right whale, which is pretty long to my knowledge and very powerful, could easily destroy your watercraft if you were to clash with it. So most recreational anglers, they have navigation systems, and there is accounting for seeing these whales. There's a lot of technology available, and the federal government has even refused to adopt some of the technological means and offerings and innovations of the boating industry. I went to a Marine Congress event where they were displaying this technology.
What does it do? What does the technology you're talking about do?
So it's a supplement to your navigation system, and it can account for any whale sightings, sonar type of activities, better tracking metrics, or you could adopt a separate navigation system if it's not already plugged into one that you currently use, that specifically makes sure that your boat will not come into contact or try to deter contact with endangered whales or just any type of whale in particular. So they have the technology available to prevent this clashing between endangered whales and your boat, but even the federal government refuses to adopt it because they love this narrative.
That's kind of a double-edged sword, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can see that, but as a fisherman, you know that where the whales are, they're probably there for a reason. There's probably bait there. There's probably other fish there. That's probably where you want to fish. And so if you mark a whale, then no one can go there. I don't know. That might be the most productive area. So I see why you couldn't purse seine there. But recreational fishing, those are areas that are sometimes targeted. You want to go where the fish are. And that may also be where the whales are. Mm-hmm. So I could see that there might be resistance to even report where you saw a whale if that's what the repercussion is that when you report one, now you can't go there. So who's going to report them?
It's a very arbitrary standard, and I believe the marine industry has tried to account for that.
Yeah.
And both interests can be represented.
I mean, it's a good thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't know. I think that's a place where a lot of people, when we talk about policy and we talk about these proposals, I think a lot of fishermen have to look at it and say, well, how would that affect me? Mm-hmm. This is what I like to do, and this is what I want to do, or this is how I make my living. If I'm in support of this deal, is that good for me or bad for me in the way that I fish? And I think a lot of people, even in the recent, the deal about making fishing a constitutional right in the state of Florida, initially you have a lot of people that are like, I don't know, because one of the things that it said in there is that it preserves traditional methods of fishing. And some people are saying, well, does that mean that you can bring back mullet nets? Because we got rid of mullet nets, and we don't, and everything is better on the fishing side of things. Everything seems healthier. There are a lot more mullet. There's a lot more fish. The redfish have come back. A lot of fish have made a big recovery. It's undeniable that certain areas are so much better off with the ban of the mullet nets. But then some people see this deal as are we being fooled here? And it turns out that I don't think that we were. I think that having fishing be a constitutional right in the state of Florida is probably a really, really good thing, probably a great thing. But at what point do you have to kind of, or maybe you've even seen this in some of the policy that you have either been aware of or studied, that it could backfire on you in certain ways, like because of the way that it's written, it does something that was unintended, 10 or 15 years down the road. Have you ever seen anything like that, to where policy seems like a great idea at the time, and then, like, I don't know, we see it with like Title IX in women's sports. Like when it first came out, it was all about equal number of men's and women's sports. And now fast forward to today, and it's like this whole different conversation that was never anything that was originally intended. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Is like,
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
The policy of like making something making fishing a constitutional right, and then people that have seen this a couple of times before, they're like, I don't know, I'm going to read into this. I'm going to read into this and see what it means to me. And that I see this thing that says traditional methods, and that got some people to where they questioned it, and some people were against it, saying, no, man, don't do this, because I'm telling you, it's not what it seems. Like, how do we, like, I guess the overall question is, how do you know when you're seeing policies, you're seeing proposals, you're seeing things that sometimes look really good on the surface? How do you develop enough understanding of the issues, or develop a skill of reading through these proposals, or a skill of contacting the right people like yourself, or somebody that really knows this, and asking the right questions to determine if this is a good idea or this is not a good idea?
Yeah, with respect to the right to hunt and fish, I know Florida's did have some, language people were concerned about. And full disclosure, a couple of my friends were the organizers of the Yes on 2 campaign, and I largely support their efforts. And even they were very...
We had them on the podcast too.
Yeah.
Travis Thompson was on the podcast.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about, because some people that are greatly in support of fishing were not so in support of that particular proposal at first.
Right.
And so I wanted to get Travis on to ask those questions, because I don't really know. Like, I'm all for fishing being a constitutional right.
And going back to your question, how we know that this type of policy would not be infringing. So I live in a state where we have it, and I have not seen any shrugging of the law. We do not permit poaching of fish either. I think even the penalties are stiffer now. We had a very horrible poaching incident of a deer. So we see this across fishing and hunting, that if you commit an egregious act, even with the right to hunt and fish amendment, you're still subjected to penalties, I think even harsher penalties now. And what we do see, people who are kind of like worried about what does the future look like. And I think my right to hunt and fish amendment has been law for a couple decades, maybe 2 decades. And we've seen actually a continued replenishing of people buying licenses. You see more people in these states that have protected hunting and fishing. You see more licenses sold. You see more lands and waters protected for recreational purposes. And it's not as negative or problematic as a lot of people make it out to be, especially when there's accountability to it. It's just an extra protection in the event that, let's say, a legislature were to come in the future and try to reimagine what conservation looks like. We see efforts a lot out west in California, Oregon, Washington, where they're changing the intent of the state wildlife agency to move away from hunting and fishing. And that's largely what propelled Florida to take action preemptively to prevent that from happening.
That preserves that. If somebody comes in and says, you know what, we think that, stalking wildlife, stalking fish, stalking this is the way to go, and to stop all hunting, if you have already made this a constitutional right, they can continue on with the stalking programs or whatever they're thinking is the best way at this point, but you still have the right to hunt and fish. And that was the intent of this proposal and what passed in Florida, so that now, no matter what happens, you still have the right to hunt and fish, as long as you're doing it legally and you're licensed and you're on the right piece of property, and you're doing it in an area where it's allowed.
Yeah, no, and I think the questions people had about, certain laws in effect, and I don't think I think Travis probably explained it to your audience, that if there are certain prohibitions of using different nets or different types of tools, I think those are going to stay within the laws, of course, where necessary. It's not going to change, the different types of methods per se. And I know every state is different in terms of what it means for traditional methods or not. I don't remember seeing a provision in Virginia relating to that, but every state's amendment is crafted very differently. But, living in one of those states, I have yet to see, this kind of disregard for existing laws or different types of methods of take in areas where certain things are not, for instance, I can't do archery hunting in Virginia, in my corner of Virginia, unless I have a license. I can't use guns in my corner of Virginia because it's a very urbanized area. So even with that, amendment, so other areas of Virginia, different nearby counties, even you can use a firearm for hunting or whatever. And so it could depend upon the locality, the county. That doesn't change. Sometimes, certain improvements should be made in terms of the tool. And on the fishing side, if something is shown to be detrimental to the fish species in question, I think those are going to be largely left in place. Living on the other side of a law that has been in effect, a constitutional amendment that's been in effect for at least over a decade, I haven't seen any negative repercussions from it. Like I said, I think most states that have it tend to see a greater culture that welcomes hunting and fishing. You see more monies coming to your state from Dingle, Johnson, Pittman, Robertson. You see more and more people going to the field versus states that don't have these protections codified. Maybe the one exception would be South Dakota, but South Dakota could soon be adopting a similar amendment itself. But it's just there hasn't been an appetite to pass it because people don't understand kind of the dynamics at play with kind of these anti-conservationist forces coming in and trying to remake wildlife agencies since they think they're insufficiently conservationist or they're too favorable in their mind of hunters and anglers, even though we pay the bulk of conservation funding in this country. So I think they're largely good in the long run. Of course, every state can tackle, how do you go about preserving certain things or keeping certain standards in place? And if there's a gap in the law or the amendment in the future, you can rectify it. I think that's what it opens it up to. Right. But it's not supposed to change the dynamics of hunting and fishing or encourage criminal behavior or trampling of property rights. That's not what it's aimed to do. It's aimed to be respectful towards existing law, but also to enhance and preserve that outdoor heritage for years to come, especially with these threats that are looming.
So that's the idea. And so getting back to this question is like that's the idea that it is designed to do that. But sometimes there's ways that things are written that maybe in the future it could be interpreted differently, or something could change, and this actually could be something that is used against you in some way, shape, or form. So that goes back to my original question: is like as people that are just general hunters and fishermen. Some of us are lawyers. Some of us know more about the law than others. Some people are more interested in reading an entire proposal than others. Some are never going to read something like that. How do you educate yourself? What's the best way? Is it listening to a podcast like this? Is it listening to your podcast? Is it writing your congressman? Like, I don't know. What would you suggest as the best way when someone sees a proposal? It could be any proposal. It could be on the wind. It could be making fishing and hunting a constitutional right. It could be anything to where you're like, well, that's something I really like to do. I would like to know how that affects me. These are the questions I have. Am I going to be able to hunt and fish like I always have been? Are my kids going to be able to hunt and fish? Am I going to have to buy a special license, or am I going to be able to go to the same areas that I've always been? I don't know. Whatever your interests are, as a fly fisherman, as a bait fisherman, as a recreational fisherman, or even as someone that likes commercial fishing in a way that really resembles recreational fishing, like spearfishing for hogfish or something like that. You could go out there and you could spearfish for hogfish as a recreationalist, or you could be doing the same thing in exactly the same place, and you could sell that fish to a restaurant with the appropriate license. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is the best way when we see one of these proposals on the horizon? What's the best way to learn about that and to understand whether that is a good thing for you or not a good thing for you in the type of fishing or hunting that you like to do?
doing your own research, of course, is extremely important because you and I can both talk about this. And if someone listening for the first time is like, I don't even know how to begin the process of informing myself, we may not be helpful in that respect unless you're really attuned to what is happening in the policy fights at play. But how you want to start your, let's say, awakening legislatively is you want to look to see what Congress is presenting itself. You can look at the various different committees. So you'll see a lot of fisheries activity per se in Congress in the fisheries subcommittee, which is part of natural resources. You'll see a lot also for vessel speed rule under one of those commerce related committees, and the same in the Senate. So you could look to see if you see a law is being proposed federally, go directly to that committee and read through the legislation. Congress.gov is very, very easy to read. There's like a 1-paragraph summary about what the bill is intending to do, good or bad.
So that's
so you
where
could
you
start
would
there.
go. You would go to congress.gov, and then you would look for one of these subcommittees. Is that what you're saying?
Or type in the topic. If you know what the bill's name is or the topic at hand, you can see what is being proposed and introduced right now with this new Congress
What if you don't know that? Like, what if you just want to know what are the things that these people are thinking about proposing? Like, is there a place where you can understand what's on the docket? Like, it hasn't even been a proposal. How would you do that? Tell them how they would do that.
Yeah, you would look at, congressional committees, and then you'd also look in your state committees too, in your state legislature, because so every state is very different in terms of how they present legislation. So here in Virginia, we know ahead of time what bills are going to be introduced, the name, the topic, who the sponsor is, what the goal is, what's the economic impact, how much does it cost taxpayers, what are the potential rights that would be enhanced or lost. As a result of that, Congress is a little less transparent. They do some estimates about how much it's going to cost, what you're potentially going to gain or lose from it. But
that's public information that you can access.
Yes, it's very available, very much available. And if
Congress.gov?
Yes, yeah. Or if you want, let's say, a third party, which will be really on top of this, you don't have time. Maybe you're working 9 to 5, you're maybe working on a charter offshore. You don't have time to read this, and you need something that's quick and bite-sized and understandable. A great resource would be the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. They're a bipartisan outfit here in Washington, D.C., and they are really on top of everything relating to fisheries, including hunting too, but they really do have a good handle on that too. And the American Sport Fishing Association is also really on top of this as it relates to recreational fishing. So those two groups, I would say, are the best. If you need something on the go, very easy to understand, they do the legwork for you. They're legislative people. So going to the groups that represent our interests, those two aforementioned ones in particular, it will save you a lot of time, and then you can understand like what is at play and what is at stake.
And so those two, Congressional Sportsmen's Society, is that what you said? Foundation. So the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and then ASA, American Sport Fishing Association. I think people are way more familiar with that organization. They're the ones that put on ICAST and other things. You can expect that if you go and get information from either of these places, that it is going to be just the news. Like no, it's not biased. It's not like this is what we're trying to do. This is what is being proposed, and you can learn about that.
Yeah, for the most part. Of course, they're going to, for particular pieces of legislation, they may have a vested interest if their lobbyists are constructing it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they'll give you a fair accounting as to why this is a good piece of legislation, what are the impacts on, recreational anglers. But they'll give you an objective view for the most part as to what is good, what is bad, what's questionable, where there needs to be input. But for the recreational angler, it's very easy to digest, and it's not really riddled with partisan ship whatsoever. It's more so objective.
Yeah, those are good resources. Congress.gov, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, and ASA, American Sport Fishing Association. Those are all three very good resources. So if we, like, one of the things that we're talking about often on this podcast as it relates to all of these different things that you and I have touched on today, or many others, is that we as recreational anglers would do ourselves a great service to unite around a lot of these issues, right? But sometimes there are differences that cause infighting among anglers. And it seems very counterproductive to me because there are many other groups that are much larger than anything that we could possibly amass with the amount of people that are interested in recreational sport fishing. If you were to give us any sort of advice from your experience with all this policy and seeing what has passed and what hasn't passed, and if you were to give anglers as a group, recreational anglers, despite your differences, what can we do to, number one, preserve access? That's my most important thing. Like, we need to at least be able to go there. Preserve our right to hunt and fish for generations and be able to access these places. When it comes to, seasons, creel limits, all of that, I think that all fluctuates every single year. And those are uncontrollables. But it seems like the controllable is access and coming together as a group so that we can preserve that. What would you say would be, one or two of the most important things that we could do?
Well, I think at the root of it is trying to foster community among the different shades of recreational fishing. So I'm unusual where I like to do fly fishing. I like to do conventional bait and spin cast as well. So
me too.
I try to do all the styles. Yeah, we do exist. So I think building and fostering community among those different sides of fishing is extremely pivotal. So you build trust. You have friends across all those different shades of fishing, and through those conversations and friendships and relationships you make with all these different types of anglers, you can all come to an understanding, and the conversation about policy naturally comes about. So even in fly fishing, I have been able to kind of come across to people who may differ a little bit, on policy, understanding that maybe their style of fishing, fly fishing, could be ultimately impacted too, because someone could say, okay, we get rid of bait and spin cast. Is fly fishing enacting the same harm as the traditional types of style fishing because they're torturing the fish by catching and releasing? It's even more harmful. The argument we hear that even catching and releasing is more torturous than just, put in take. So trying to come across to them and say, it's not just, from your perch where you're not going to be affected. It's everyone. And I think when people, they're your friends, they're your confidants, you go fishing together, you have memories, whatever. When you build that trust, you're able to come across to people and say, okay, I know this may not affect you now, but think long-term, what if you were to lose fly fishing? And when you throw that question out to them, I think they are coming to an understanding that it's even fragile for them, because what's to say that, a regulator or someone could target that type of style of fishing. So eventually it comes to people who least expect it. And then that threat is very real and very pressing. And then they decide to jump on board, because when we're all, I don't like to talk about, the collective, that's not really in my jargon, but I think when, the wider community comes together and understands that we're all on the same team, we all are, potentially losing our ability to have access. We've seen, like I said, we've seen a loss of access for all different types of fishing, under the last 4 years. So people have kind of started to see, what that loss of access looks like, whether you go offshore or onshore. And I think even the fly anglers are starting to realize that they're not immune to any type of machinations of people who want to do away with fishing altogether, because they will ultimately be the last on the chopping block, but ultimately they would be targeted as well. And we see this a lot with hunting. We see people coming together a little bit more on the hunting side with the different styles and the different types of methods of take. And I think that's starting to trickle into fishing. Although people view fishing as not really being threatened so much like hunting is, because hunting is a little easier to target in the mind of people who don't like that activity. Fishing has been harder to target because it's more economic. I mean, both are economical based, but it's not as perceived as violent or threatening like hunting is. And I don't agree with that notion, of course, but that's what we can understand our opponents to say, that they view this to be harmful, even though the monies that flow from these activities go back to boost these numbers. Same with fishing. So fishing hasn't really been targeted so much, but it could be. And there are gestures where they do affect.
There have been attempts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see PETA or other groups blocking the boat ramp at a bass tournament, or
Mm-hmm.
you'll see other attempts at it. And for whatever reason, it hasn't stuck really like it has on the hunting side. Hunting's just, it's just an easier target for those type of people, I think. But I think the real thing that I get from your advice that you just gave us there is that we're all susceptible to a loss of access, and I don't know why anyone would want to intentionally open the door for that type of regulation to come in. But I don't think that that's what's happening. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think a fly fisherman is saying, oh, well, the use of barbless hooks is good. Let's do that. Let's make it catch and release only. Let's make it fly fishing only because, because it seems like it's better. I don't think that anyone that is pushing that agenda is thinking that, well, we have now said you can't fish with a certain type of fishing rod here, and you can't fish with a certain type of hook here, and you can't fish at a certain time of year here. What's next? The next thing is you can't fish here at all with any type of tackle. Yeah. And that's a very slippery slope. And I think that it's something that if you haven't seen that happen in your area or your lifetime or in a place that you really, really care about, then it seems like it's impossible. And it seems like what you're doing is very beneficial to the environment, and it's very beneficial to the fishery, and you're doing it out because you love that place. I get it. But it's a slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope. And so, I don't know. We have this show here, and this is going to be one of the series of Anglers Unite. And it's just kind of a reminder always that we are one group, the recreational fishermen. And if we can come together and foster the community like you're talking about, to build and foster a community that is recreational anglers. Yes, we understand that we have all these differences. Yes, we understand that we have different ways that we like to fish or places that we like to go. But what we really need to do is to try to build and foster this community so that we can all go to all of these places forever. Because that's one, when that gets taken away, I've seen it. You may have also. I've seen it in my lifetime in places that I really like, that they have any group, NOAA, the National Marine Sanctuary, any of these other groups have said, this is a place for whatever reason it is, bird nesting area, fish counting study, for whatever reason, we are going to close this down temporarily, and we'll reopen it at an undisclosed, undetermined date if we decide to. And those have been closed for 25 years. Mm-hmm. No one is able to go in there and fish. And even worse than that, in some cases, people can't go in there and fish at all, but you can run 50 jet skis around in 4 inches of water, disturbing the seagrass and beaching them on a causing all kinds of problems to the nesting birds, to the sea life. Meanwhile, you can't go in there with a 5-year-old and use a live shrimp and catch one snapper. You can't do it. It's totally illegal. But you can do this other activity, which seems to be, in my opinion, far more damaging. But when you say, even then, when you say, well, you can't go in here with jet skis anymore, well, then what's next after that? You can't go in here with boats, and you can't go in here with a certain size boat, or you can't go. I don't know. It's just you have to be very careful on those slopes, and it just seems like the way to protect your own interest as a recreational fisherman is to unite with other recreational fishermen that all want the same thing. We all want to be able to access these areas and do the things that we want to do, fish and hunt, or, doing that legally and ethically in a responsible way. I think we just have to be very, very careful of some of these slippery slopes, like purposefully opening the door to invite in regulation because you don't like the way somebody else is doing it.
Yeah, I saw this in California with marine life protection areas, and that recreational access was never restored. And I went to Europe, and we could become a lot like Europe, which is very overregulated, and you have to buy your influence to go even the most basic form of recreational fishing. So we don't want to become like Europe in that respect.
What is that in terms of Europe? You said by your influence. What does that mean? Like you have?
It's a very play-to-pay system. The license structure is not as organized as ours. It's really hard to know, like, are you doing something illegally or not? I mean, I fished legally in Europe last summer, but they don't make it clear as to what you can and cannot do, or you can only really access private lands to go fishing in much of Europe. In public waters, it's not as organized or transparent as to what you can and cannot do. And there's a lot of restrictions as to what you can catch and keep too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know, and then the fishery is not what it was once a long time ago with the different trout species and other things. Now there's a big carp fishery over there, and those guys love fishing for carp. But I think that's because that's what they have to fish for. Which we have carp all over the place, but we also have other fish that some people consider to be better than carp. Other people really like carp. I don't know, whatever. Carp are cool, but anyway. So we have a lot of things on the docket to watch out for and to be aware of that you've brought a lot of attention to. I feel like, and maybe you can give me your input too, as you know, whether it's this year or 4 years ago or 8 years ago or 12 years ago, when you have a regime change in the White House, that's going to be a time for some sort of change as it comes to fisheries regulation. This is a time that if there was ever a time that you wanted to be aware of proposed policy, it seems like right now is as good a time as ever, because one thing is for sure, some things are going to change. They may change in a way that you like or a way that you don't like. But if we can be aware of those changes, then there's a better chance to unite to where we can be in favor of them or to be opposed to them. And maybe there's just not a way. I don't know. We'll close this on asking you this question. Is there a way that anglers can unite, and despite all of our differences and despite the differences in location, in technique, in preferences, is there a way that we can all come together and unite for the good of recreational fishing?
I think there is. I've seen it here in my backyard. I've seen it with people I've interacted with and befriended across the fishing industry, going to ICAST and similar events like that. It already is existing, but I think we just have to emphasize it more now that we have, like you said, an exciting time where we can see a lot of legislative wins and a lot of things are our heritage bolstered and restored, and access enhanced and expanded upon. So I think we're at a really exciting time. And just emphasizing that to people and saying you have a seat at the table. If you don't like some regulation, put your inputs, or if you like something, you can praise it, whatever. And if you feel like things are going great in, nationally, but not in your state, you can also weigh in on changes in your state, because you'll feel those impacts a lot sooner than you will federally. So it's really important to be engaged. It's a very exciting time to be a recreational angler in America, because we're going to have a lot, given back to us, but also a lot of things, I think, reemphasized, and with more people wanting to decompress and go into nature with how stressful things are in the country. We have an opportunity to even take new people who've never gone fishing out with us and create that cycle of understanding of not only fishing being a fun activity, but also its economic benefits, its conservation benefits, and perpetuate that cycle. So we have a huge opportunity to bring in new people into our fold and grow the fishing industry even more than what it's already doing.
Right on. I like it. Well, that gives me hope that we can actually get together and unite and make move the needle in the way of preserving access. And one of the best ways to do that is to educate other people, like you said, to take other people fishing and show people, kids, other people that don't have a heritage in fishing, to give them an opportunity to go with you. And show them how easy it is. You can just go down to this pond down the street, and it's free, and you can, just go fishing. I think that's a really good way for people to move the needle in favor of more people in the sport and more people fishing, and then those people get educated. Those people unite as well. But Gabriella, I appreciate you coming on and telling us about so much of this. I learned a lot myself. And tell us again how they can listen to your podcast and any other resources that they could follow what you're doing.
Yeah, so find me on social media. I have blue check marks everywhere under my name. Gabriella Hoffman. If you want to hear about the latest public policy stuff, I encourage you to listen to my District of Conservation podcast. I also do public policy full time. I lead a group that is catered to getting women interested in energy and conservation issues called the Independent Women's Forum. And I lead our Center for Energy and Conservation as director. So if you're interested in the public policy side of things, I also weigh in on things there. Writes lots of columns, materials. Social media is the best, I would say, vehicle to see what I'm up to, but I have a good pulse on what's happening legislatively, and I also try to put in my fishing and outdoor adventures out there for the people to see for themselves too. So I'm not just talking, I'm also acting and doing things too.
That's awesome. Well, I'd love to have you on again soon to check in and see where we are with all of these different things, and do that regularly if we could.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity, Tom.
You're welcome. And thank you for that. We'll be back next week with another great guest, just like Gabriella, and you can unite with other anglers. Anglers Unite, that's what this is all about, getting together and fostering that community, just like Gabriella said. So if you can take somebody fishing for the first time, do it. You will be better for it, and so will the sport. All right, that's it for today. We'll see you.